Welcome to the Logic and Quantitative Reasoning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Hamadi. I'm an associate professor of philosophy at Houston Baptist University and one of the designers of this course. Wherever you are, if you're driving or doing dishes or laundry or unwinding after a long day at work, I hope you're having a great day. Something my favorite podcasts have in common is that they don't waste a whole lot of time on chit-chat. I mean, I guess I could talk to you about all the different issues that I'm having in my life, why my experiments with sous vide cooking are not going terribly well, and that having to figure out how to put headphones on my kid's piano as well. Yeah, no one wants to hear that stuff. So let's go ahead and just get started. If you've taken my advice from last week about practicing every day, you're probably listening to this podcast early on in the second week. The theme for this week is fallacies. Most generally, a fallacy is a false or mistaken idea, and that's fine, of course. But one of the benefits of logic is being able to take something that is vague and general, like the idea of being false and mistaken in this case, and bring some more rigor to it. So saying that an argument is false or mistaken is like saying that a person is sick. Okay, that's a start. But in order to cure the sickness, or even just make the person more comfortable, you have to know how exactly they're ill. A doctor's job, in this case, is to find out what is causing the illness, and only then can a treatment be created. It's the same way with logic. A lot of people have had this experience. They'll hear someone make their case, and then you think to yourself, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but something is not. This is not convincing, or I feel like maybe they're pulling a fast one on me. So replacing this feeling that something's wrong with knowledge of exactly why the argument is no good, well, that's one of the things that logic will teach you how to do. Now, while we will examine the issues of logical form for most of the course, then here at the beginning, this second week here, the second module, we're going to be examining the content of the argument, not just the form. Well, there's a common trope in fantasy literature where if you know the true name of the wizard, you can break his spells. You see this in Lord of the Rings, you see this in some of the Narnia books, but yeah, knowing the true name of the wizard and calling them by their true name will often break whatever enchantment that wizard or sorceress has placed on you. And a lot of times, the same experience is had when you call the fallacy by its correct name. It's almost like once you recognize, oh, this is a, insert fallacy name here. This is an ad hominem fallacy, or this is an ad verecundiam fallacy. Then whatever power that particular argument would have had on you, the way that it might have warped your thinking or influenced you, just goes away. It's really fascinating. What's even better about this, for those of you who do appreciate fantasy literature, is some of these true names of the fallacies are actually traditional Latin terms. So you might want to engage in your own inner Harry Potter, wave something, maybe a pencil, and that'll be your wand, and then you can say the fallacy name in the most dramatic possible way. You can pretend for a minute to be Hermione Granger or Ron Weasley or whoever. Anyway, let's start with one fallacy that I think is probably one of the most instructive ones to begin with, mainly because it's just so incredibly prevalent, and that is the ad hominem fallacy. And this is one that you'll see all the time. And there's a couple different versions of it, but basically what this fallacy does, the ad hominem, it's Latin for to the person, to the man, right? Homines, right? To the person. And what this fallacy does is it ignores what the person is saying because of something about them personally. So, for example, let's say someone that you don't want to listen to is making some claim that you don't want to hear. And instead of thinking, well, that this person might be right, or what's their evidence, or what's my evidence that they're wrong, instead you zero in on that person themselves and then say, well, I don't have to listen to that, or because you are something, fill in the blank. It can be you are ugly. It could be you are a bad person. Or it could be you're a member of a group that I despise. And this is one that's used quite a bit today. And you see this across the political spectrum. Instead of engaging with someone's argument, instead you say, well, they're a feminist, or they're a socialist, or they're a pro-life activist, or whatever, right? But because you're a member of this one group, your opinion no longer means anything. The worst forms of ad hominem are ones where the person can't do anything about it. There's nothing that they can do to, say, change their skin color or whether or not they were born a man or born a woman. You can't do anything about those. Or whether they were born poor or rich. That's the circumstances of birth are beyond someone's ability to go back later and change. But then does that mean that everything they have to say is then invalidated, false? No, of course not. Who someone is separate from what they're trying to say. What a person is, who a person is, what kind of a person someone is separate from whether they're saying something that's true or false. And I think once you recognize that, well, yeah, even a bad person can say something true, that this idea of, well, I don't have to listen to them because of who they are, should just dissipate. It should just vanish. You see this all the time. Sometimes it's used in a way to call out hypocrisy. So you could say, well, I don't have to listen to what you're saying because you're guilty of the same thing. Like, well, maybe they are. Maybe what they're saying is the height of hypocrisy, but that doesn't make it false. It can still be true and hypocritical. Or another one is where a person is advocating for something that benefits them personally. Say a student could be advocating for less homework. Well, yeah, that might benefit them. That might give them some more free time. But that doesn't mean that what they're saying is false just because it benefits them, just because they're the kind of person that would stand to gain. They could benefit and also be advocating for something good or telling the truth. So ad hominem it's incredibly prevalent, and it's something that once you recognize that it's going on, a lot of times its power just vanishes. It's really remarkable. A second fallacy that's very prevalent is the fallacy of appeal to inappropriate authority. By the way, one of my pet peeves is when the fallacies are taught by non-philosophers. A lot of times they'll misrepresent the fallacies in a way that might not be as helpful. I was reading a critical thinking book that was written by a sociologist, and they talked about the fallacy of appeal to authority. Now, notice this is different. I said appeal to inappropriate authority earlier. This one is just appeal to authority. So this is already not a fallacy, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he probably meant appeal to inappropriate authority until he started reading the description. The description for the appeal to authority for this author was any time you accept something because someone else says so. In other words, you didn't go independently verify the information yourself, then you are engaged in the appeal to authority. Now, I thought this was really strange, mainly because there's all sorts of stuff that the only reason that you believe it is because someone else told you. And in fact, that's the only information that is even possible to obtain, is that someone else told you. Let me give you an example, and this is one that when I'm teaching my students, they always get a kick out of. How do you know that the people who say they're your parents really are your parents? Now, I know some people, they come by their parents in unusual ways, but for a typical bio-intact family, how do you know that those are your real parents? I mean, they say they are. You say, well, how could you independently verify it? Well, you could go ask their parents, right? You could go ask grandma and grandpa. And you say, well, how do I know that my parents are really my parents? And your grandma might say, well, I was there at the hospital, and here's a picture of me holding you as a baby. You look at the picture, and well, you look at your grandma and you realize, well, this person in the picture looks an awful lot like your grandma, although she does seem younger. You've never personally seen her that you remember looking that young, so you don't know for sure from your own memory whether this person in the picture really is your grandma. And then also, that baby doesn't look like you anymore. I mean, you see a woman that looks like your grandma holding a baby, but you don't look anything like that now. A lot of times, babies have different eye color. You can't tell what their facial structure is going to look like because they're all, puffy and squishy, and they're like little larvae, right? Little grub people, right? You don't recognize yourself when you look at your baby pictures, and so you see grandma holding a baby, or a person that looks like grandma holding a baby, and you're supposed to what? Take it on her word that that's her, and that the picture in there is really you. I mean, did she see you every day? Or did she help raise you? How do you know that? How does even she know that you are the same baby that she held without independently verifying it? So my students will often say something like, well, you can independently verify who your parents are. You can take a DNA test. You might even do it secretly so that your parents don't know. And so while they're sleeping, you sneak into their room with the I don't know, the Q-tip and swab the inside of their mouth, being very careful not to wake them up. And then you swab the inside of your mouth and you put it in little tubes and send it out. And then, wait a few weeks and then you get this report back. It's marked confidential. You have to somehow get to it before your parents see what it is. You open it up, read what it says, and it says, congratulations. This is a match at such and such percent. We are very sure that you are related to the people that you sent these swabs and that they're related. I say, proof. Not so fast. You didn't do the test. Some stranger did it and then sent you something in the mail with their conclusions. So if you accept what they say, you're believing something just because they said so, and you're still doing the fallacy of authority, appeal to authority. You don't even understand how the test works, right? And then if you did, and you actually got the machine that did it, how do you know that the machine works except that the researchers and the company that made it certified it? But you didn't certify it, they did. So you're having to, at each step, take someone at their word. Believe them because they said so. And if you had as your personal creed, I will believe nothing unless I've proved it myself, then guess what? You're just going to believe nothing. Because at some point, you're going to rely on someone else's verification, someone else's memories, someone else's eyes to confirm things for you. And then, according to this author who wrote this critical thinking book, you've committed the fallacy of appeal to authority. So I just think that's crazy. Of course you're going to believe things based on someone else's authority. The problem is when the authority is an inappropriate authority. And there's a variety of things that could disqualify someone from being a proper authority. So take a second here. After the break, I'll explain some disqualifiers for a good authority. Out of the many things that can disqualify an authority, the three big ones are a clear bias, not being an expert in the field, and then also being unreliable. So the clear bias one is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, obviously, no one is ever completely neutral, especially in the field that they work with. They're going to have preferences. But a clear bias would be a bias that might override that person's judgment and not enable them to see the facts that otherwise they would be able to see being an expert in their field. If you're not an expert in your field at all, then probably, we shouldn't pay that much attention to what you have to say about the topic. You see this a lot of times in advertisement. You'll see a celebrity endorse some product or appear in the product's commercial. And, it depends on whether or not you think that person is an expert in that particular field. So think about, say, a sports figure. Let's say a famous basketball player is endorsing a product. Well, if they're endorsing a cleaning product, say, oh, this toilet bowl cleaner is the best, and I'd stake my reputation on it. Well, how often do you think a famous basketball player cleans their own toilets? I'm gonna vote no on this authority. But what if they said, hey, I use this brand of socks? Well, this famous basketball player has to rely on the quality of his footwear, and socks are a part of that. And if a famous basketball player said that these socks were really, really good, especially on the court, I'd probably believe them. They probably know what they're talking about. How many famous athletes actually eat Wheaties cereal? And they've had campaigns using athlete endorsements for decades. One thing to keep in mind about being an expert in a field is if you're expert about one thing, human nature tends to make you believe that you're also an expert in other things. So I personally am an expert in philosophy, and I'm an expert in IT as well. I worked in it for many years before I was in academia. And I know a lot about those two subjects, a lot. But there's a lot of stuff that I don't know really anything about. But it's easier for me to get lured into a false sense of expertise because I know a lot about some topics. I'm more likely to think that I also know a lot about other topics when truly I don't. One other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about appeals to authority, and we'll wrap up the podcast with this one. There's two different types of authority that you have to keep in mind. One type of authority is expert authority, and that's you're listening to what someone says because they are recognized to know something in that field. And especially if the knowledge is something that is difficult to gain or requires a lot of experience, then we should defer to experts in order to help us make sense of the world. But there's a completely other type of authority, and this is a kind of performative authority. This kind of authority is something that makes something true, not just reports on the facts. A good example of this is parents and children. So I have two kids, I have two daughters, and sometimes there'll be a dispute about what we're eating for dinner. One of my daughters will want chicken nuggets and the other one will want a salad. And I decide we're having a salad. And you say, well, why do I get to make that decision? Why don't we put it to a vote or something like that? Well, because ultimately the decision is mine because I have authority, but it's not the authority of an expert. What gives me the authority is not because I've done more reading on nutritional health or because I'm aware of the economic impact of having one choice versus another, but instead I get to choose because I'm the parent. Because these kids are entrusted to me and I have to make some decisions, even ones that they don't like, and that my word is in some way final. The same thing is true for things like bedtime. or whether or not they're allowed to watch R-rated movies or whatever. It's not that I'm an expert and that gives me authority. It's that my position gives me the right to say what will and won't happen. That is the same thing that's true with other types of authority like this. So, for example, if you're pulled over on the side of the road and a police officer says, please give me your license and registration, and you say, why? And he says, well, because I'm the policeman. You say, oh, well, that's a fallacy, right? That's an appeal to authority. And I don't have, what makes you an expert on legal issues? I'm a lawyer, or I'm in law school. I know more about the law than you do, so you should give me your license and registration. No, it doesn't work that way. His position as a police officer allows him to have a say in what happens. In fact, allows him to straight up make the decision about what happens. Same thing that's true, say, if you're in the military and your commanding officer gives you an order. It's not because he's an expert in the field. It's because he has that position. So when we're looking at appeals to authority, this ad verecundiam fallacy, so everyone get your wand out, swish, ad verecundiam. Sorry. The ad verecundiam fallacy only deals with expert authority, not with positional authority. So if you say, well, this person is an authority on the topic, not this person is an authority for our behavior, for our actions. Keep that in mind when you're thinking about appeals to authority. I think that wraps it up for today. I will see you all next week. Remember, practice, practice, practice. The people who practice this is going to be an easy class. Everyone who waits till the last minute, tries to cram in, it's not going to work. You've got to practice. You've got to stay on target. I will see you all until next week. Enjoy logic.